Ladies and gentlemen, what you have been waiting for is this exciting keynote address this evening. All week we have been reflecting on the historic year of 1968, framing our discussions in the context of Dr. King's unfinished work and what the dream still demands. Our keynote speaker recently stepped down from his position of the North Carolina NAACP to focus on reviving Dr. King's last project, the 1968 Poor People's Campaign. We could not think of a better speaker for the dream still demands. Like Dr. King, our speaker is a theologian who understands that social and economic justice issues are moral issues, just as Dr. King called for a revolution of values in 1967. Our keynote speaker has called for a moral revival in present-day America. He is asking the question, why? He is a powerful, unifying voice for the dispossessed and disenfranchised, and a leader in the fight against systemic racism, poverty, and inequality. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome to the stage the founder of the Repairers of the Breach, co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, and pastor of Green Leaf Christian Church in Goldsboro, North Carolina, the Reverend Dr. J. Barber II, who drove here from North Carolina just to get here tonight.
Hello, family. It is a blessing to be here tonight in more ways than one. I want to thank God for the privilege. I'm coming fresh from the hurricane and the waters of North Carolina, and I want to thank all of you for your prayers. I also want to ask that we would applaud the waiting staff, all the people that have waited on us tonight. I ask you to keep all of the people in your prayers who are underwater and trying to survive in this moment in North Carolina and South Carolina. Thanks to Sheila Jackson Lee, our chairperson, and my congresspeople, G.K. Butterfield and Dr. Alma Adams, who are here. I thank God for them and for all of you that have gathered here on tonight. I want to talk for a moment about knowing who we are in times like these. And there is a text, since I'm a preacher, and I hope you don't mind if I lift one verse. It's in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 39, it says, "We do not belong to those who shrink back unto destruction, but we are among those who have faith and who work for the perseverance of the soul." We do not belong to those who shrink back. I come tonight to this Congressional Black Caucus because I know a little something, Brother Roland, about this caucus and the strivings. I know about Hiram rebels before there ever was a caucus out of Mississippi who replaced that terrorist, treasonous terrorist, Jefferson Davis, the former president of the Confederacy. I know about George White from North Carolina, who gave the last speech of the last congressperson elected during Reconstruction in 1902, and he gave that Phoenix speech and said, "Like the Phoenix, we will rise from the ashes again." But I also know that the founders of the Congressional Caucus, they said in 71, it started out as a Democratic Select Committee, but in 71 they said that the caucus was not born to promote a party, but to be the conscience of the Congress, and to ever remind Republicans and Democrats of the need to strive for a more perfect union. You know who they were, don't you? Shirley Chisholm was the single woman in that midst, but oh, she was powerful. And Clay and Collins and Diggs and Hawkins and Metcalf and Conyers and Mitchell and Nix and Stokes and Rangel and Dellums and Fontroy. They were the founders. And upon forming, they said this: the purpose of this Congressional Black Caucus is to seize the moment, to fight for justice, and to raise the issues that are barely debated. Because they knew in order to deal with America, they had to know who they were. They also knew that they sat in those seats because those seats had been baptized in blood. Today, as we are here, this is the 55th anniversary of the killing, the murder, the domestic terrorism of those 4 little girls in a Birmingham church. But I want to remind every political elected official and everybody that holds an office, what we do has been baptized in blood. So we are here, my sisters and brothers, to cry out on behalf of those who've not yet been heard. We are here not to shrink back, but to hold on to the hope that America yet may become what she has long promised to be: one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And that's why I raised this text today. That's why I want to talk about we are not of those who shrink back unto destruction. You know, Paul was a black brother. I hope y'all know that. When he wrote this, he was a brother. He was a brother. And Paul, when he wrote these words, the Jesus movement was under assault by a malignant narcissist, political leader in Rome. And that malignant leader, narcissist leader, had a bunch of enablers. And they were trying to turn everything back in Rome. And Paul said to the movement, because there were people in the movement who were thinking about going along to get along. And Paul said, we are not of those who shrink back unto destruction, but we are those who persevere unto the salvation of the soul. In other words, you better know who you are when somebody is assaulting everything you believe in. The truth of the matter is, properly defining yourself and who you are is a critical philosophical theological discipline that has penetrating and practical implication, particularly when one is under crisis. When you're under threat, the most important thing is not what your enemy does, but do you know who you are and whose you are and why you're really being threatened. Knowing who you are is critical to your sanity and your ability to sustain a fight back when you are facing what Paul Tillich called the very threat of non-being and non-existence. Now, to be sure, my brothers and sisters, we've always had to fight to maintain a proper sense of self because America has always struggled with who she is. America, this American project, has always had a kind of split personality, at times political and social schizophrenia. a great gulf between what America says she dreams to be and what she is in reality. That's why even in her great hymns, one of them says, America, America, God mend thine every flaw. Even the hymn writer knew that America can be schizophrenic at times. Dr. King once critiqued this nation and said, let us be dissatisfied until America will no longer have a high blood pressure of creeds and an anemia of deeds. And then it wasn't it Langston Hughes that said, America, oh, America has never been America to me, but I swear this oath that America will be. In America, there has been progress, but this has only come when those who knew who they were and who America should be dared to challenge this country and not to give up on her possibility. It amazes me in this moment when people keep saying that they've never seen anything like what we see now going on in America. And I want to know, what history class didn't you take? Have mercy, Jesus. This is the third time that a president lost the popular vote but was given the presidency. And that's not new. First time, 1877, Rutherford B. Hayes. Next time, 2000, George Bush. And both times things were bad. This is not the first time we've seen white supremacy and white nationalist thinking in the White House. Go back to Woodrow Wilson, who was the president of Princeton University. And when he became president, first he lied to black folk to get elected in the first place, and then chose not to meet with black folk. And then he played the movie Birth of a Nation in the office 100 years before Steve Bannon was ever in the White House. A lot of people don't know that statue in Charlottesville was not raised to give homage to the Civil War. It was raised to give homage to Woodrow Wilson and the return of white supremacy into the highest parts of our government. It was in 1965, I was thinking about this the other day, when the Dixiecrats were fighting the passage of the Voting Rights Act, Julianne, and they were so in fear. And many people were asking Dr. King, why are folk fighting so hard against voting? And Dr. King said, wait a minute, let me give you an analysis. And this is what he said in Montgomery after the Selma move. You know, you have to read something about Dr. King other than I Have a Dream. Y'all do know that, right? And in 1965, at the end of the march, he said this, Senator Booker. He said, why is there so much opposition to voting rights that will actually help white people too? He said, it may be said of the slavery era that the white man took the world and gave the Negro Jesus. Then it may be said of the Reconstruction era that the Southern aristocracy took the world and gave the poor white man Jim Crow. He gave him Jim Crow. And when his wrinkled stomach cried out for the food that his empty pockets could not provide, he ate Jim Crow, a psychological bird that told him that no matter how bad off he was, at least he was a white man, better than a black man. He ate Jim Crow. And when his undernourished children cried out for the necessities that his low wages could not provide, he showed them Jim Crow signs on the buses and in the stores and on the streets and in the public housing. And his children learned to feed on Jim Crow, which was their last outpost of psychological oblivion. Listen to Dr. King. He said, that's what happens, and that's what happens when the Negro and white masses of the South threaten to unite and build a great society, a society of justice where none would prey upon the weakness of the other. Whenever that is about to happen, he said, an oligarchy always sows racism and fear to keep poor black folk and poor white folk from coming together and changing America. Now, when Obama won in southern states like North Carolina, Florida, and Virginia, I'm not talking about that you had to agree with every policy. But when Obama won, the coalition won, that exposed the possibility of fusion coalition in the South. And with these changing demographics, or as my president, Derek Johnson of the NAACP, likes to say, metrics, with these changing metrics, it showed that the South doesn't have to be locked up anymore. Black and white and brown people can come together. And now what we are seeing Because of that possibility is another chapter of America's regression reality. Now, since the publication of Michael Wolff's Fire and Fury, and now Bob Woodward's Fear, pundits and politicians have again questioned President Trump's mental stability, provoking the Twitter-in-chief to retort that he is a stable genius. Now, I leave mental health diagnosis to the healthcare professionals, but we would do well to heed the King's prophetic diagnosis of our moral malady. The truth of the matter is the sickness, the socio-political sickness of fear and hate and racism has still not been cleansed from the veins of this democracy. And it still produces this reactionary extremism in state houses, the U.S. Congress, and in the present administration. And I want to say this, it is bigger than one man and his personal sanity. Hear me now. In fact, somebody, or a good reporter, ought to get with some scholar and do an analysis, and the analysis should be entitled, What Went On Underneath the Tweets? You know, we used to sing a song, Beneath the Sheets. Some of y'all sung that before y'all said. But what went on underneath the tweets? Because to focus on Trump alone is to miss what's happening in America. Nell Painter, the Princeton scholar, has said that what we see now with Trumpism, not Trump, his entire cohort of extremism, is symptomatic of an often reoccurring iconography in our American history. We come to our senses as a nation for a moment, for a twinkling of an eye, and then we move backwards, and we have a massive, mean, and regressive relapse. What we are seeing, Senator Harris, is not just the problem of a person, and it will not be gone if he is out and Pence gets in. Can I teach a minute? Don't you think that if Trump was just gone and Pence got in, that suddenly things would be better? In essence, sometimes Trump might be a blessing because he's too foolish to be quiet. Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy. Whatever Donald Trump's mental state, don't just focus on him. And if we just remove him, 60 million Americans were willing to entrust our government to him after they heard the extremism of his policy, the racist, mean, economically insane, and constitutionally inconsistent policy. 60 million people. And so if he's crazy, what's wrong with America? Whatever his mental state, in 2016, we, Democrats and Republicans, went through 26 presidential debates, and not one of them focused for 1 hour or 30 minutes on systemic racism. Now think about that for a minute. The truth is, America has almost lost, never really had, the ability to talk about racism. Now, we got to be clear on that, especially in this room, because nearly every politician in the United States condemned the hate after the violence by anti-black, anti-Semitic, and anti-gay white nationalists in Charlottesville. Almost everybody that's got any sense would say, we don't agree with that. Or when Roseanne Barr says something foolish, everybody says, oh, that's racist. We don't agree with that. But I stopped by to tell you, racism and white supremacy is not just about hate, individual hate. It's about power. And the question is not whether politicians condemn hate, individualized hate, moments of hate, but whether they promote the policy agenda of white supremacy. Because the fact of the matter is you can be black and a white nationalist. Because white nationalism is about policy. So if white nationalists are against health care, if white nationalists are against voting rights, if white nationalists are against living wages, and you black and you vote with them, then at best you are an enabler of white nationalism. That is why it's so telling. We didn't have one 30-minute debate out of 26 presidential debates about systemic racism. Before Trump, 2010, we saw the assault on voting rights that set up a Trump possibility. In 2013, the Voting Rights Act was gutted, thrown into the Congress. Paul Ryan and Boehner and McConnell have refused to fix the Voting Rights Act for 5 years. Now watch this. We call Strom Thurmond a racist, and he only filibustered the 1957 Civil Rights Act for 1 day. We have seen massive gerrymandering, massive voter identification requirement. We've seen the rollback of early voting and same-day registration. We've seen more than 26 states that represent more than 500, that represent millions of black voters engage in voter suppression. We don't know what Russia did yet, but we know what voter suppression has done. And we didn't have one debate about this kind of racism. And do you know wherever there is voter suppression in the state, that state has the highest poverty, the lowest wages, the greatest hostility toward immigrants and the LGBT community, and the deepest cuts in education. So voting rights is not just about black folk, because what white supremacists will do is they will suppress the vote and win because of racist voter suppression, and then once they get in office, they pass bills that hurt mostly poor white folk. We haven't had one debate. When you think about how many unconstitutionally constituted state legislatures we have because of voter suppression and what the Brennan report says, when you look at the fact that we have children, immigrants being snatched up and kidnapped, in essence, because they're brown, when we look at the resegregation and underfunding of public schools, that's racism. When we look at the refusal, when we look at the appointing of racist judges to the bench, that's racism. Not just when Roseanne Barr says something. When we look at the fact that we just watched a person named Kavanaugh go through some hearings, and you all know if that was a black man trying to get, or a black woman being planned for the Supreme Court, they would not even make it through a hearing. What we just saw was white privilege happening on TV right in front of our face. White privilege. When we see all the lies that President Trump has told, and we know if Obama had told a half of one of those lies, they would have called, that's racism. When we see the Senate steal a Supreme Court seat, think about that, in a way we haven't seen since the Civil War. And when right now on the Supreme Court, we have 4 Supreme Court justices that have been appointed by 2 presidents who didn't win the popular vote. That's racism. Nancy McClain in her book, Democracy in Chains, says that's racism. And she says, be clear, and she's a white professor from Duke, they don't want 5 seats, they want 7. 7 seats. And when Mansfield and Dirksen, a Democrat and a Republican in 1965, Reverend Jackson voted for the Voting Rights Act. And they brought Republicans from the North and Democrats from the North together. Only one Republican from the South, out of Texas, didn't vote for the Voting Rights Act back then. And yet, when Senator Harris asked Kavanaugh, was the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act settled law, he refused to answer. That's racism. I'm not answering you, black woman. And I'm not going to tell you if I believe Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act that says you cannot discriminate against me in voting is settled law. It's settled law. That's systemic racism. And we had 26 presidential debates on the Democrat and Republican side, and not 130 minutes focused on systemic racism. This is more than just about Donald Trump. We have 140 million poor people in this country, not 39 million, 140 million poor people that are poor and low wealth, 14 million children. The poor are not some small minority, not lazy people or black people. They are black and white from Appalachia to Alabama. 65% of Latinos, that's 37 million people, poor and low wealth. 60% of black people, 25.9 million people, are poor and low wealth. 41% of Asians, 7.6 million, are poor and low wealth. 67 million white people, 39% of white people, are poor and low wealth. Poor and low wealth. 38.2 million of our children are poor and low wealth. 20.8 million of our elders. We have 37 million people without health care right now, even with the Affordable Care Act. And for every 1 million people that do not have health care, 6,000 die every year. Which means, as I tell some preachers, that if you preach over a person and says God called them home when actually they died because we don't provide health care, you are telling a lie on God and a lie on this government. 250,000 people die every year from poverty. Yes, we should march in the street when a cop shoots a black person unarmed. We should march and stand up. But there's 250,000 people dying from government policies every year. More than die from heart attacks, more than die from cancer. And when we look at the fact that 60% of Latino workers make less than $15 an hour in the South, and that half of all jobs in the South are less than $15 an hour, and yet 400 families in this country earn an average of $97,000 an hour, while we lock people up who simply want 15 because they can't survive on $7.25. The battle we're in is not just about one person. When we look at the environmental dangers right now, the reason we're having this hurricane, like we heard my son's an environmental physicist, he said, Daddy, because the environment is warming up, it's messing up the jet streams. That's why these hurricanes are coming and stopping and twisting and turning in ways that we never saw before. And who gets hurt the most? Poor folk, poor black folk, poor white folk. When we think about there are 4 million families in this country that can buy unleaded gas and can't buy unleaded water. When we look at the fact that right now, copper companies in Arizona are drilling on Apache lands and poisoning the aquifers of the people who were first here, the Apache Nation. And coal ash is being spilt into the rivers, and pipelines are being built through sacred lands and across black lands and poor white lands. And federal deregulation could allow mines in Alaska. And our Alaskan brothers and sisters and the natives in Alaska are suffering because nobody ever goes and does a news report on Alaska. And then when we look at the unending war economy, they told me sometimes don't talk about this, Reverend Barber, but you got to. And this caucus has to talk about it. 54 cents of every dollar going to the military, discretionary dollar going to the military, and only 15 cents going to health care, education, affordable housing, and infrastructure. We paid more than $4 trillion since 2001 to fight the war on terror, while claiming that we lack the resources to provide decent medical care for every American. Our problem in this America is not that we don't have enough money, we don't have enough moral capacity. I have enough moral capacity. And yet, we didn't have one 30 minutes, Roland, one 30-minute debate on ecological devastation. One debate dedicated to systemic racism. One debate dedicated to systemic poverty. One debate dedicated to the war economy. And I declare that until we change the moral narrative, we are subjected, we have the possibility of getting a Trump over and over again. Because until we tell the truth, then people cannot be set free. And then the last thing that we got to deal with, and we didn't have a debate on this, is this false moral narrative of so-called Christian religious nationalism, where so-called black and white religionists, I don't call them evangelical because I'm an evangelical, black and white religionists have the nerve to go pray, P-R-Y, for the president while he is praying, P-R-Y-I-N-G, P-R-E-Y-I-N-G, on the poor and the very people that Jesus told us to care about. And then when Reverend Robert Jeffries has the nerve to tell the president at his inauguration sermon, God has given you the authority to build a wall. Knowing that Jesus didn't build walls, he tore down walls. And we haven't had one debate on morality. So my brothers and sisters, here's what I want to say. While whatever Trump's mental state, it is good that we're having a mid-year election because maybe people will understand this ain't just about Trump. This is bigger than one man. Some Republicans have spoken out against the president's tweets and antics, but they still vote for his agenda. Don't be fooled. They don't object to what he's doing. They just object to what he says sometimes, and that's only in public. And many Democrats, on the other hand, have imagined that Trumpism can be countered by a simple economic message that doesn't address the deep connection between our historical racism, inequality, and the rise of white supremacy. When politicians, some of them say his word about shithole nation is just tough talk, and others say it's racist and vulgar, his words, but they refuse to call his policies racist and vulgar, we are not really engaging in dealing with the issue of systemic racism. We face a challenge that is more fundamental and more potentially transformative than either party has yet recognized. This moment is not about whether a party is possible. This moment is about whether America is possible. Hear me now. We are in the birth pains of a third reconstruction and a third deconstruction at the same time. And America needs more than a new president. Yes, we need one. We need a moral revival. And in order for this to happen, we must know who we are. We, the people who suffered on the slave ships, are once again being called to be the conscience of this nation. We must know that in the 21st century, racism and economic fear still too often conjures a powerful magic which compels this nation to seek safety in hating the other and a false security in nativism that has failed us before and will fail us again. And that's why we cannot be of those who shrink back unto destruction. But we must press on to the perseverance of our souls and the soul of this nation. The Southern strategy was designed to last 50 years. It was began in 1968 when Kevin Phillips told Richard Nixon, I know how we can win forever by controlling the South, South Carolina, North Carolina, Alabama. We won't use the N-word anymore. We'll talk about tax cuts, entitlement reforms, and law and order, and we will get big money to use this formula to cause division among the very people, poor whites, poor blacks, and poor Latinos, that ought to be working together. And we will fool people that the other people are their enemies, when the fact of the matter is if you're poor and you can't pay your light bill, we all black in the dark. So in this moment, part of what we have to do is help America face this question. What is it that causes many poor whites, there are more poor whites than there are poor blacks, to vote against every program they need? What makes poor whites vote for a candidate who promises them they'll be against the LGBT community, against abortion, for prayer in the school, for tax cuts, and they can't see that those same candidates are against living wages and health care and fundamental rights? What myth will make you vote for somebody who's going to take your health care? A kind of person that wakes up in the morning and the only thing they can think to do is take somebody's health care. And 2/3 of the people losing their health care are the very people that voted for Trump. What myth? And we've got to face this myth, but not in a destructive way, not in a put-down way, but in a way that can bring people together that can bring poor and working class white people and black people together and Latinos to form a multiracial coalition. We must take on the myth and bring people together, because the truth of the matter is 97 million people stayed home in the last election that could have voted, partly because they don't ever hear their issues. Right up here in the Beltway, you would think nobody exists in America but the middle class. That's all people want to talk about. 750,000 fewer African Americans voted in the last election than they voted in 2012 that didn't vote in 2016. And right now, Ben Jealous did a study, and that study said if we would register 30% of the unregistered African Americans in the South and then connect them with just a percentage of poor and progressive working class white people and Latinos, we could change the South. And if you change the South, you change the nation. But you can't have people coming to Selma, for instance, during the time of the remembrance of walking across the Edmonds Pettus Bridge, and there are white politicians who say they love what happened in the past when Selma is the 9th poorest city in America right now today. We must work to come together. That's why a whole cadre of us, Derek, come together, said it's time for a Poor People's Campaign. Notice, not another organization. No, we don't need no more organizations. Lord help. We got enough strong organizations. We need a movement. It's movement time. It's nation building time. We need a movement to change the narrative and force this country to deal with the issues of race and poverty. We have to get poor blacks and poor whites and others to come together. The 140 million poor people in this country represent the salvation of this country. But if we keep going through elections and we can't even say the word poor, people don't hear themselves and see themselves. Wealthy oligarchs know that they cannot hold on to power in a truly democratic election. That's why we're witnessing an all-out assault, foreign and domestic, on our basic values. Now, in his final sermon, Dr. King in 1968, I don't know if Mark Thompson is in here tonight, but people will talk about, the sermon was entitled, I've been to the mountaintop. The problem with that is, the way this system does, it often makes us listen to the hoop, but not to the gravy. In that speech that night, if I read right, Dr. Jackson and others, Dr. King looked at the sickness of our society, and he said, my friends, nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now. So this is not the time to not know who we are. James Baldwin said it like this: we made the world we're living in, and we're the ones that are going to have to make it over. The time for right now is for all of us, whatever organizations we're in, to remember that we do not belong to the people who shrink back when stuff gets tough. America needs a conscience in the Congress. America needs a conscience in the street. We need it in the street. We need it in the Congress. We need it at the ballot box. So I stopped by this evening, blown here by a hurricane. I left my folk back home because I just thought maybe this old country boy had something to say. We must come together in the movement, in the street, and fight in the street and in the Congress. Put down our petty differences. It's time to get the hell out of banquets and go to battling. It's time to battle. We must change the public conversation. These next election, America itself is on the ballot, not just who supports Trump. And those, we cannot let extremism and those who serve corporate interests say that health care for everyone is socialism. We need leadership who will say, no, it's not socialism, it's a moral social contract rooted in the establishment of justice for all. If caring for people is socialism, then the Constitution is a socialist doctrine. because it says we're supposed to promote the general welfare and have equal protection under the law. If caring for people is socialism, then Jesus was a socialist when he said that a nation is supposed to care for the sick, the hungry, and the stranger. If providing health care and living wages and stopping racial discrimination is socialism, then ending slavery was socialism, and civil rights was socialism, and women's rights are socialism, and LGBTQ rights are socialism. We cannot allow those who want to change the narrative to define the terms of the debate. If caring for people and giving them health care is socialism, then bailing out businesses that fail because of reckless behavior is also socialism. We must challenge those. We must be those who challenge Democrats to do more than they would do. And we must challenge Republicans to do less than they want to do. We must bring Satyagraha, truth force, to the political space. We cannot fail to be who we are. We must be the conscience of this nation. Otherwise, the soul of this nation will be fatally wounded. And I stop by to tell you that there are some folk that can't help us. They're not going to get up now. Frederick Douglass is dead. I went to his grave up in Rochester. I called his name. He didn't get up. Sojourner Truth is dead. They're not coming back. Ella Baker, not coming back. Fannie Lou Hamer, not coming back. Rosa Parks, not coming back. Dorothy Day, not coming back. Rebecca Heschel, not coming back. James Reeb, not coming back. Martin, not coming back. Malcolm, not coming back. It's our time. And together, we must march. We must vote. We must fight. We must demand the restoration of the Voting Rights Act. We must demand automatic voter registration at 18. We must demand early vote in every state. We must demand Election Day as a holiday. We must demand just immigration reform and a pathway to citizenship. We must demand tribal recognition for First Nation and Native Americans and Alaskans. We must end mass incarceration and the new Jim Crow. We must demand federal and state living wages. We must demand a right for all workers to join a union. We must demand equal pay for equal work. We must demand a guaranteed basic income. We must demand free tuition to public colleges and education. We must demand equitable funding for HBCUs. We must demand health care for everybody. We must demand fair housing and housing for everybody. And not because it's a democratic platform, but because it's a moral platform and a right platform. We must demand clean water, clean air, a ban on fracking and mountaintop removal and coal mining and coal ash pump. We must put a ban on new pipelines and refineries, and we must end military regression, and we must demand and stop the privatization of our military budget. We must demand a ban on assault rifle. We must demand the demilitarization of our borders and our community. We must have it. We must demand it. We must fight for it. Our vision must be bigger than Trump. Our vision must be saving the heart of this nation. And I tell you, these are tough times, Reverend Jackson. There's some mean folk out here, some greedy, and they're cocky on every side. Never before in recent history has so much money been spent to resist equality. It's pornographic, it's blatant, it's arrogant. These are troubling times. But we are not of those who shrink back unto destruction. Faith says stand up to Pharaoh. Faith says stand up to false prophets. I wish I had a witness since I came all the way through a hurricane. Faith takes on the giants. Faith refuses to deal with sinister situations. And I've seen it. I've been on the road. I don't know where y'all been, but I've been in Missouri. And I've seen young black low-wage workers and parents hook up with brigades of octogenarians, 80-year-old plus. I've been in New York and seen community organizers meet with veterans and religious leaders. Been in California and watched undocumented and indigenous folk hook up in Los Angeles. I've been down in Mississippi and seen white folk and black folk fighting in the Poor People's Campaign about poverty and against suppressing the vote. I've been in West Virginia and seen white women from West Virginia hook up with black women from Alabama. I even heard Nick Smith, a white Appalachian boy, a fast food worker for the Fight for 15, who's organizing in the mountains of Virginia. He said this. He said, look, I'm poor, I'm white, but I'm here. And this hillbilly is going to join other poor folk because we got to push, because we have no other choice but to push and to fight back. And if we bring all that together, we, notice, are not of those. Not I. We are not of those. And I feel, God, I feel something. I know the power of coming together. I know it biblically. Can I preach for 2 minutes? I know the power of getting together, because when Moses and his people and that rod came together, Pharaoh came down and the Red Sea had to open up. When Esther and Mordecai came together, they were able to stop the plots of destruction against the Jewish people. When David and his rock and his slingshot and his faith came together, Goliath fell, and they tell me the next morning in the Jerusalem Post, it read, the bigger they come, the harder they fall. When Shadrach, Meshach, and that bad Negro got together, way down in the fiery furnace, God cooled the fire down. And somebody said they saw a fourth one in there, and it looked like the Son of God. I know what coming together can do biblically, but I also know what it can do historically. Truth is, we've always had to come together. During slavery, it looked like justice had lost. But when Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass and white Quakers and white evangelicals got together and formed a fusion movement, slavery came down. Women didn't have the right to vote, but when a sister named Sojourner Truth and a Quaker named Lucretia Mott and a white woman named Mother Jones came together, they won the right to vote. Plessy versus Ferguson looked like it had the victory, but when Thurgood Marshall got white lawyers and black lawyers and Jewish lawyers together, they went before an all-white Supreme Court, one member who had been a member of the KKK, but they had to vote unanimously and bring it down. It looked like Jim Crow had beaten down injustice, and injustice couldn't rise again. But when Rosa Parks and Martin King and Bayard Rustin and Jesse Jackson and Glenn Smiley and James Reed and Jonathan Daniel and Viola Wilson got together, they tore Jim Crow down. It looked like apartheid was going to last forever. But when Bishop Tutu and Nelson Mandela and Ron Dellums and this Black Caucus got together, they tore down apartheid. I know it biblically. I know it historically. So no matter how you fight, if we fight together, we can win. How do I know it? Because I know it also personally. You know, because several years ago, some folks said I'd never walk again. They said I'd never get out of a wheelchair. I was 30 years old. I had always depended on my legs, but I woke up one morning and I couldn't move. I spent 3 months in UNC hospital. I was facing depression. Didn't know if I'd ever get up again. But for 12 years, I was in a wheelchair and on a walker. But over those 12 years, I remembered who I was and whose I was. And somehow my mind got together, and my doctors got together, and my nurses got together, and my swim coach got together, and my therapist got together, and the prayer warriors got together. And I can jump now. I can march now because God helped me. And I'm telling you, I'm a witness. When we all get together, when we all vote together, when we all fight together, when we all stand together, when we all work together, what a day, what a day, what a day, what a day of rejoicing it shall be. It's time to take off the suits, get in the street, go to the ballot box, and save the heart of America together.